I've been seeing more and more stuff come out about an alleged Switch 2, and frankly, I think it's about time. The fact that Nintendo has gotten away with 2017 mobile phone tech for as long as they have is, well, par for the course for Nintendo at this point. Remember, this is the company that released a motion-controlled console with no HD support to go against the 360 and the PS3. And honestly, I respect it. I respect it to some degree, because out of all the major console manufacturers, Nintendo has always been the one with fun at the top of their priority list, even if it means compromising technical capabilities, and that's honestly refreshing. But over the last few years, Nintendo's really been trying my patience, especially now that they're charging $70 for 720p 30 FPS. I'm never going to be able to get behind that. So yeah, I'm pretty happy to hear that they're allegedly working on a follow-up console. Maybe now we'll get 900p 30 FPS.
Zooey mama!
But seriously, the fact that Nintendo is allegedly working on a new console is exciting news. I'm genuinely interested to see what they can bring to the table now that the Switch has kind of solidified their avenue in the console market, and hopefully this means Nintendo will be able to maintain their user base while also maybe enticing more people in with better game performance and maybe more multi-platform game options. But with all the news of a Switch 2 comes all the speculative tweets on Twitter about it. And yes, I'm going to keep calling it Twitter until Elon Musk serves me a cease and desist letter via drone strike. So while scrolling Twitter the other day, I saw this tweet from a Twitter user asking other Twitter users if they want to see the Switch 2 have backwards compatibility, which, like, why would you say no to that? Backwards compatibility should be an essential feature of all modern game consoles. It's good for preservation, it's good for the consumer, and it often comes with improved game performance on games that you already bought, which would be an amazing feature for a follow-up to the Switch, a console with some really great games but really outdated performance metrics. This tweet is basically just this meme, which, funny enough, was also one of the top replies, but when looking deeper into the replies, I found some interesting people who seem to think backwards compatibility is not a necessity, or in some cases, not even a selling point, and I couldn't help but whip out my trusty screenshot button the way Elon Musk whips out the worst changes imaginable to Twitter whenever things get too quiet. And by no means are the screenshots I'm about to show you indicative of the overall Nintendo fan mindset, because I think about 99% of people agree that backwards compatibility is an essential feature of new hardware, but that 1%, they're wild. I do not. I don't want the temptation to be the first year or two of games needing to be compatible with both and not taking full advantage of the new system's hardware. Install base too huge on Switch for it to not hold back the development of those newer titles. Okay, several things wrong here. First of all, whenever a new console comes out, the first year or two are always going to be trying to be compatible with both. That's how it's always worked. Because nobody expects absolutely everyone to jump to the new system right away on day one. That's just unrealistic. But you know what makes that transition from one hardware generation to the next a lot easier? Backwards compatibility. And you know what makes it a lot more enticing to get more people on the new hardware quicker? Backwards compatibility. So if your concern about the new generation of hardware is that it's going to be held back by compatibility for the old gen, you should be in favor of backwards compatibility, because it means more people will upgrade sooner, and instead of 3 to 4 years of cross-gen like what we're seeing with the PS5 and Xbox Series, you can get it done in 1 or 2. And frankly, Nintendo's always been pretty good at this because of their dedication to backwards compatibility. The first Switch was kind of an exception because obviously the Switch wasn't backwards compatible with the Wii U, but also nobody bought the fucking Wii U, so I don't think Nintendo was all that concerned about preserving it. Doesn't mean it was like morally the best call to walk away from the Wii U generation, but it's business-wise understandable is my point. But the Wii was 100% backwards compatible with the GameCube, and that's one of the main reasons it was so successful right out of the gate. The DS was 100% backwards compatible with the Game Boy Advance, which was one of the reasons it was so successful right out of the gate. Like, you see where I'm going with this? If you're concerned about backwards compatibility hindering new hardware somehow, you've got it completely backwards, because history has proven literally the opposite of this. But also, the bigger issue with this flippin' tweet here is that you somehow think a year or two of cross-gen games is so problematic that it's worth erasing 6+ years of Switch software in order to avoid it. Like, really? No, would drive the cost up of the newer console. My backlog is never ending. Most of my Switch library I haven't played, so leaving out backwards compatibility lets the old Switch still get use. So, no backwards compatibility because your backlog is big. Really? No backwards compatibility because you still want to use your Switch? Like, you realize that if the new hardware has backwards compatibility, you're not being forced to use it for your old games, right? Like, no one's holding a gun to your head if you want to play Switch 1 games on the Switch 1 instead of the Switch 2. And honestly, it's kind of fucking weird that you want this nearly universally wanted feature to be absent from the Switch 2 solely because you prefer keeping a never-ending pile of consoles in your closet. Like, that's just not a good reason. If it is, then Nintendo needs to stop selling all the Switch games from 2017, 2018, 2019, etc. that still are full price, still in the top seller charts, or else there will be no room for newer games. Switch games might actually be too popular to be playable on the next console. What? So let me get this straight. You think if Nintendo releases a console that's backwards compatible with the last console, they should pull the last console's games from sale because they would overshadow the new ones? You think the Switch 1's games are so good and so popular that they would continue selling gangbusters after the release of the Switch 2, but that's actually a bad thing and Nintendo would want to or benefit from pulling them from sale? You think Nintendo would want to stop making money off games that people continue to buy years after release?
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Aside from that just making no business sense, it also glosses over the pretty obvious positivity that comes from being able to enjoy previous gen games on new hardware. Those games are preserved, the games live on. By your own admission, certain Switch games may continue to sell after the release of the Switch 2, especially if they're made backwards compatible, like Tears of the Kingdom, or Mario Kart, or Smash Bros. If those games run on the Switch 2, they will totally keep selling. The same way that certain Xbox One and PS4 games continue to sell well after the release of the 9th gen consoles, because they were good and playable. Do you just think game preservation is a bad thing? I don't care. I keep my consoles and play my games on original consoles. Name checks out. Yep, that's moving on. I want the carts to have a different taste. This time even more bitter. No, I want to buy all my games a second time. I hate money. Not really. I'd rather Nintendo concentrate on building something stronger and not be held back by old hardware. If anything, make the Switch cheaper. Everyone will or have more than one currently. Is buying multiple Switches just a thing that commonly happens? Is that a thing people do? Other than limited editions, I've never heard of that happening. I've never heard of someone being like, oh, I have a Switch and I like it, better get another one. I want to play 2 Switch games at the same time, doodly-doo. I can't think of a joke. Never mind, cut that. That was fucking stupid, Joe. You're fucking stupid. I can't help but think about the fact that you never hear this kind of conversation around PC tech or anything, you know? Like, new graphics card comes out, and obviously the new graphics card runs the old games better. And then you never hear people like, man, this thing would have been better if it didn't run the old games. That dev time that went into making the old software compatible with the new hardware was such a waste of time. Also, I don't care how cheap you make the Switch. If the Switch 2 comes out and it's not backwards compatible, people aren't going to go out of their way to buy both consoles. But also, you have to remember that Nintendo's audience is not stagnant. The new hardware isn't being built just to satisfy those who already bought a Switch. Yes, it's trying to get all the people on the Switch to go to the Switch 2, but it's also trying to appeal to as many new people as possible. I don't have a Switch, nor do I want one, but if the Switch 2 comes out and it's backwards compatible with the Switch 1, the Switch 2 is now much more appealing to me because I can play the games I decided to pass on last generation in addition to whatever else Nintendo is cooking up for the new hardware. Like, as someone who didn't buy the Switch 1, leaving that entire generation of software behind for the Switch 2 doesn't do you any favors when it comes to winning me over, if that makes sense. You can make the Switch $100 and I still wouldn't want one. Nintendo had 6 years to convince me to buy this thing and they still haven't. So why would that change if they made it cheaper along with releasing an entirely new set of hardware that doesn't even work with the first set of hardware's games? Like, what? If it is an actual Switch again, but better than the ones that are around, then yes, but if it's something completely new and different, then no. I saw a few people saying stuff like this and I just don't get it. I don't get it. Like, on a surface level, I guess I understand, but Nintendo has proven that this isn't how they operate. Like, yeah, the DS being backwards compatible with the Game Boy Advance made total sense, because at its core, the DS was basically just a roided up Game Boy. But the Wii was an entirely different, entirely new concept from the GameCube, and yet Nintendo made it completely backwards compatible. They went out of their way to make it happen, and that's one of the reasons why I still think the Wii was their best console. Same with the Wii U, really. The Wii U was completely different from the original Wii, you know, naming aside, and yet it was still completely backwards compatible. Again, Nintendo went out of their way to make the transition as easy as possible. Obviously, going from the Wii U to the Switch was a different story, partially because the Wii U flopped and Nintendo probably wasn't all that worried about preserving it because they had to rush the Switch to market, but also the fact that the Wii U was a disc-based medium and the Switch was cartridge-based. But if the option is there for Nintendo to make the Switch 2 backwards compatible with the Switch 1, why wouldn't they do that, regardless of how new of a concept the console will be? The original DS had a separate cartridge slot just for Game Boy games. The Wii's disc reader was compatible with the stupid mini discs of the GameCube. My point is Nintendo has made their systems backwards compatible before, despite the devices being completely new and the game's storage being different. If they want to make the Switch 2 backwards compatible, they will. You know, console design be damned. It was reassuring to see that the majority of the internet was unified in the sense that the Switch 2 needs backwards compatibility to be a true follow-up to the first system, and I definitely appreciate the industry starting to acknowledge the fact that backwards compatibility is a fantastic feature for all new hardware. But I'll never understand why so many people are so resistant to it. I'm yet to hear a single logical argument as to why the Switch era should not be playable on the Switch 2, nor have I heard a good argument as to why we, as the consumer, would not benefit from backwards compatibility on the new hardware. And I'm genuinely interested to hear from those of you who may disagree with me, because I am coming up completely empty on this. But my closing thoughts are this. Backwards compatibility is an excellent feature. It preserves software for the next generation, and adds tons of value to new hardware by expanding the game library, and it means that all the money you spent on games doesn't just go down the drain because a corporation basically just said fuck you, start over. A good game never goes bad, nor does it not benefit from being run on stronger hardware. Game preservation is extremely important, and with how many beloved games came out on the Switch, I guess I'm just surprised at the mental hoops people are willing to jump through to not want to keep those games alive on the next generation of Nintendo hardware. Toodles.